if you can, let us know you're here. In the chat box on the right-hand side of your screen, if you can hit the reply to everyone function and let us know your name, your title, department, organization, or the municipality that you're representing. It'll help everyone get to be on the same page about who we're going to be working with today. And also, if you can let us know if you've worked at all with substantial improvement, substantial damage before. This presentation will be recorded, and we will be using the WebEx chat feature a whole bunch, as well as polling questions and also breakout rooms likely. So excellent. Looks like folks are starting to write in the chat box. I just realized my camera's off, so I'm going to figure out how to turn that on.
On the left, second button in.
I'm in the host role, so it it looks a little different. Yeah. Okay. I think it should be good. Okay. All right. Hopefully, I'll figure that out in the next little bit. Okay. Excellent. Welcome. So Milford is here, DNREC, of course, Lewis, excellent, FEMA, Seaford, Fenwick Island, Ellesmere, fantastic. We've got a good group here, and we do anticipate a few additional folks joining as well. Okay, all right. Thank you for joining. We're looking forward to talking through all of this with you. Just for some background, so as mentioned, my name is Rebecca Wetzler, and I am with Michael Baker, and as our Mark and Alyssa, we will be providing this presentation, and our goal today is really to be facilitators, because you're the ones who know your community best, and so we'll be asking a lot of questions about what you do in your area, and we'll be suggesting some things that we've heard from other folks in other areas. But at the end of the day, if you have a question or an idea for a solution, please feel free to share it, because this is a group where your neighbors may have something that could work for you, you may have something that could work for them, and our goal is just to kind of help with sharing some of those ideas and best practices. We're also thrilled to be working with Delaware, and Elise, feel free to correct me, but I believe that Delaware is the first state in Region 3 to really be taking a comprehensive approach to substantial improvement and substantial damage. So you're all lucky to be working in this state where you have a guidance document and this training and a few other tools just readily available. All right. Let's see. Oops. So for an overview, during this training, we're going to be talking about some background on, what is substantial improvement, what is substantial damage. We'll be talking about how you can set up your administrative procedure. We'll be practicing some of the implementation techniques, really think about what would you do in the field. We'll have a couple exercises, and then at the end, we'll talk about some of the next steps. If at any point you have questions, feel free to write them in the chat box. I think we should have some wiggle room for time for discussion. If we end up getting too many questions, we'll have to hold questions to a particular slide and section of the presentation, but otherwise feel free to write them anytime. All right, so what is the substantial damage, substantial improvement? Why are we here? There's this small note in the NFIP that any structure in the special flood hazard area modified more than 50% of its value must be built back into compliance with the floodplain ordinance, local building codes, and any other applicable guidance. So if a roof is blown off a house and maybe part of a wall and it's 50% damage, that's substantially damaged. Maybe there was wind damage from a tornado. It doesn't have to be flood specific. Although the structure does have to be in the SFHA, unless your ordinances, et cetera, say otherwise. it could also be something where it's a positive thing. Maybe the structure owner has decided to remodel on the inside. They put in some new bathrooms, a new kitchen, new flooring, and all of a sudden they had improved their home more than 50% of the value. That would be substantial improvement. And this ends up being one of the strongest tools a community has to encourage structure owners to build in a more resilient way. And it can also be one of the most challenging to implement and enforce. You know, how do you permit for some of those internal changes, like an upgrade to a bathroom? And are you tracking it over time? How are you kind of choosing to navigate that? So that's why we have this whole big training. Each community has its own process and approach, and so we're really just going to be kind of raising some ideas. For instance, if you have a neighborhood with a lot of free NFIP pre-flood insurance rate map properties, the mortgage is paid off, maybe there's not much interest from the homeowner on paying for additional mitigation efforts, this SISD tool and kind of using your administrative procedure can really help you work with those homeowners to decrease their risk and also the community-wide risk. You know, you don't have to have your emergency responders going to do swift water rescues as often or that kind of thing. So with that, we're going to go to our first polling question. About have you used SISD before? So the thought is, you know, what's your familiarity level? You know, have you brought a structure into compliance? Do you know, have you educated structure owners? Even just have you had to ask for new construction to be removed? Or what has been your experience so far? So Alyssa is going to open up the polling question now, and you'll see on the right-hand side of your screen the question and the options for answers. You can fill in as many of those apply. If you choose other, we do ask that you fill that in the WebEx chat so that we know how else you've interacted with it. And the thought here is, you know, if everyone's been using SISD for a while, we'll maybe speed up on a few slides, or, you know, if you're like, what is this SISD? Then we will go through in more detail. So let us know. Feel free after you fill in the polling question to add some notes in the chat box. Have you worked at all with substantial improvement or substantial damage in your community or the communities you represent?
There's also a time limit of 1 minute. You'll see that up on the top right-hand side. And we're at that time limit now. I think for each one of these polling questions, there's a time limit of 1 minute.
Oh yeah, good call.
Mm-hmm.
I will share the results soon. Sorry, it's just tabulating.
Excellent. Excellent. And I see a note from Matthew that you haven't had to deal with it yet, and that's great. Okay, and it looks like for some folks, they've had to bring a structure into compliance. A number of folks didn't answer, some to educate structure owners. Excellent. Yeah, those are just a couple examples of how this tool can be used, how you can kind of work with that section of the NFIP. And you may have others as well, so feel free to write it in the chat box as well. And good morning, Jennifer. No worries, we're glad you're here. We're just a few slides in. If you haven't downloaded the packet of materials, please scroll up in the chat box and you'll be able to see the link to download. All right, so why is this important to me? What's the point of all this? You know, there are a lot of different stories and a lot of people have different reasons for why this is important. I know from my experience after Harvey, some of the FEMA folks, and Elise can feel free to jump in, but were deployed to support recovery, and they found themselves in this really challenging spot that they told me about after, where, you know, once the water had receded, homeowners were allowed to return to their homes, and they started rebuilding, often using their life savings, borrowing money, you know, just trying to get their life back. And ideally, there would have been some discussion on, hey, if you rebuild this wall, make sure to add some flood vents, or don't spend your money on the drywall yet, you need to elevate first, or some of those things, and maybe some of those discussions happened. But when FEMA arrived, they followed up with the community officials saying, hey, you've got all these people working on their substantially damaged homes and not building back into compliance. What are you going to do? And it was a tough spot for everyone involved because, you know, do you sanction the community and then everyone has challenges with flood insurance? Do you tell the homeowners they need to spend more money to come into compliance? Do you let it slide with a bunch of variances and then your floodplain ordinance is pretty ineffective in the future? So the goal of today's training is really to get out in front of these conversations so that if your community experiences a disaster and your structure owners need to rebuild, they know how to do so to reduce their future risk. And you know what to do to help them. And then the conversations with FEMA can just be about where to send the money. There are also some common hangups. So for instance, you know, what are you going to do about a historic property that's damaged? Will you mandate that it follow the same upgrades as your other properties? From what I understand with, you know, elevating historic homes, you can use fill and kind of make it look like it just happened to be on a hill, but obviously that's a huge challenge, a huge cost. It's pretty risky with older structures and, you know, what makes the most sense for your community? So this whole conversation today is really going to be looking at like, how can you kind of plan ahead so that when that disaster strikes, you're able to use it to reduce kind of the risk of all the folks in your community instead of just react. And also when you're thinking about who is most likely impacted, you know, so if you're drafting outreach materials for homeowners in English, but the structures in the SFHA are in a predominantly Spanish-speaking area or maybe Vietnamese or something like that, then it may make sense to translate those ahead of time so you can make sure the folks that you want to get the message can. And, you know, ideally, this is also a space where you can tie in some of your other planning efforts, like with your comprehensive plan, envisioning where you want your community to go in the future. Maybe your hazard mitigation plan and looking at where your risks are. You know, some folks even look at their long-range transportation plan and think about like when those bridges are getting upgraded and how that might impact things. Or, you know, there's all sorts of different kind of pieces you can pull in to be always reducing your risk. All right. So this training is really intended for community officials, floodplain administrators, building code enforcement officers, and anyone else really interacting with structure owners in the special flood hazard area or influencing those development patterns and land use choices. So, you know, if you are realizing, oh shoot, I should have invited so-and-so, feel free to message them right now and say, join this meeting. They're welcome. But also, if not, we are recording, so we can always send you this recording later and you can share it with them and ask questions or have some internal discussions later on as well. All right. So for this portion, we're really just going to kind of talk about some of the background on substantial damage, substantial improvement, and, you know, it's complicated. So we have another polling question here to see where folks are starting. And so this is another select all. What do you use for floodplain management? Let's see. And this is just kind of in general. Like, do you use your floodplain ordinance, building codes, outreach, grant eligibility? Some of these are very common, some of them not so much. The polling has opened, so just as a heads up, you have about 45 more seconds. And if you can just click on what are you currently using when you're thinking about kind of how you're managing development in the floodplain, how you're working with you know, different structure owners, what tools are you using? Which ones are you leaning on the most? Maybe which ones have you considered but not used? All that kind of thing. So, and as with the other polling question, if you have a different one, you know, this is not a comprehensive list, please feel free to describe it in the chat box. Or if you have some other comment you want to make that's kind of associated, like, oh, you know what, we've used this, but really this is more important, feel free to note that too. All right, last couple seconds, please make sure you answer.
We have a chat from Gina. She also uses floodplain maps firms.
Excellent. Yeah, that's a great point. All right, yeah, floodplain ordinance, building codes, inspections, permitting, fantastic. The maps, definitely, yeah, you have to know where the lines of the special flood hazard area are and who's included in that, so that makes sense. And also, I mean, with the rate maps, you can see kind of where the different zones are, but then also with the flood insurance study, you can see the depths of where the water is for different depth grids or depth information, which can help with figuring out kind of how much someone should elevate and that kind of thing too. All right, let's see. Alyssa and I are switching back and forth with our mouse control, and I am clicking a number of times, so apologies for the delay. Okay, so substantial damage and improvement can be really complicated. It's technical, there are all sorts of things to address. So the first thing to just be aware, you know, Delaware does have this guidance document. And it's really to help you navigate this process. And there are some nuances that are specific to Delaware. So if you haven't read through it, please do. It is in the packet of materials that we sent before this training, and also the link is in the chat box too, in case you want to download now. Throughout this training, you know, you may decide that your key takeaway is to learn more for the future. Maybe you know all of this and you're realizing your takeaway is to make sure other staff know this so that in case you ever go on vacation, you know, everything can still go well. It's really good to figure out kind of where you're starting with your community and what your next steps are. So it's okay if you, as we go through this, start to realize, oh, you know what, I don't know, that's a gap. Just make a note of that so it's something that you can work on, because it's much better to have that realization now than when you're in the middle of a disaster and have 20 other things going on and everyone's really busy. And yeah, so let's see. If you do have questions throughout, let us know, you know, like even just, do we have a flood zone? I mean, 10 out of 18 of the folks said that you're currently using it, so you know that you do. And you have to be a participant in NFIP, but if you do have even just basic questions, feel free to put them in the chat box. Our goal is really to kind of make this a collaborative space and to work together throughout. So. All right, and then there are a number of other supports and training options too. So DEMA, for instance, provides some statewide coordination calls, just-in-time training, prep for EOC activations, and is really a good resource for kind of right before or after a disaster. If you have some time ahead of time, consider maybe attending one of FEMA's classes, like the Substantial Damage Estimation for Floodplain Administrators, IS 285. It's a online class, pretty easy to kind of go through. And also, they have their own tool that you can download and use to make your substantial damage determinations go more quickly. So you have to put in a lot of information up front, which takes a bit, but once it's in there, you can just, it'll help, like you can print out the placards to put on houses and all sorts of other stuff. There are also some sample letters and stuff like that in the packet or in the guidance document too. So lots of resources available. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. And these are options to be aware of and training with the tools. You know, it's always good to really make sure that you're training your staff regularly to account for any turnover and regulation changes. You know, a number of years ago after Hurricane Sandy, I went up to New York City to help their emergency management, and they had these fantastic recovery plans, the response and recovery plans, and a few of them weren't being used at all because the mayor's office had gone in and said, oh, we're gonna help, we're gonna take control over this part, and they started sending generators all over the city and all this stuff, and it was very different from what the emergency management folks had planned and trained for. And the big takeaway there was, we need to make sure we're training our political officials too, so they understand what the plan is and can follow it as well. So when you think about who you're training for instance, with substantial damage, make sure you're thinking not only of the folks who are going to be doing the actual determinations and working with the structure owners, but also who else will be making decisions, who else will be getting questions, and how can you make sure that they have the information they need to be on the same page. All right, so before the event, it's a really good idea to think about, what can you collect ahead of time? So, if you're planning to use the 50% of the tax assessed value, do you have those tax assessments? Is there a backup copy? I know with Delaware, you're using appraisers, certified appraisers. So, do you have your list of who you're going to turn to? Do you know who or how to kind of make sure that they're providing that information effectively? There's a lot that you can kind of collect ahead of time. And then when you think about your community in particular, who do you anticipate doing those determinations? Some communities say, oh, you know what, we're going to have our firefighters make the initial notifications. Oh, we're also going to have them doing this and doing that. And suddenly they realize, we have a number of people, including the firefighters, who are going to be impacted potentially by this flood or wind event or whatever. And now we're also expecting them to do multiple jobs and work overtime. We may need to expand a little bit who else is being tasked with some of this. So a lot of communities end up cross-training, so if you think about what the skill is that you're needing, there may be space to kind of look at who else could do that. So, data collection, for instance, is a big deal and really takes a detail-oriented type. Maybe your accountants or actuarial folks could take some of that on. Or, the folks doing assessments really need some interpersonal skills and need to be able to learn how to assess the property. So maybe your teachers get cross-trained, or, someone else. Oh, Mark, were you saying something? Oh, no, okay.
No, sorry.
Oh, you're good. So thinking, and, it depends who's on your payroll, who's in your authority and all that kind of stuff, but who else has the skills so that if your people are busy doing a lot of response, let's say, and starting recovery, who else can be plugged in to provide support if it's a big disaster? And, for some communities, they decide we'd rather just get MOUs in place with our neighbors and just use the same type of person from over there. So, for a localized disaster, that could work. Obviously, if it's a statewide emergency, you're going to need to get some MOUs beyond just your immediate neighbors. But there are a lot of opportunities to think about kind of who else do I need to include? How can I get that information to them? How can I make sure they're getting information to me? What kind of capacity do I have? All right, oops. And that's going to bring us to our first breakout session. And so the way this will work, Alyssa's going to sort us into, I think, let's see, probably 2 to 3 rooms. When you get into your room, if you can please choose someone to take notes and someone to report out to the larger group when we reconvene, that will be good. And then please talk about what's going on in your community. This training isn't going to be a lot. Our goal is to make sure it's not all talk at you type stuff and has a lot of space for discussion. So here's one spot where we want to know, what is your current approach? What do you think you might change? What have you been thinking about changing as a community and are trying to figure out how with relation to substantial improvement, substantial damage? And the plan is to take about 10 minutes. So if you get into your group and everyone's like, oh, you know what, we're good, we don't use this, or we use this, it's fine, and it's this long pause, maybe start thinking about, okay, why is this a pause? Is this really all set? Let's talk about, like, in the weeds, what do you do? Because even at that level, there may be something where your neighbor's doing something different from you and you can share best practice, or you can learn from their best practice. So yeah, and then if you can please make sure to contribute to your group, that'll be helpful. 10 minutes ends up going by pretty quickly, so please don't take 9 of the minutes and leave your other group members that last minute, maybe take a few minutes, a couple minutes. But also, please do make sure you're contributing because, this training is only as valuable as the effort that you're putting in. So if there's something you're confused by, you're likely not alone. If there's something you want to clarify, take the time to talk it through. And then we'll reconvene in 10 minutes. And at that point, kind of talk about whatever we want to talk through. So Alyssa, if you can please sort us now, that would be great.
Cool. I'll
It's
work
also
on it now.
at 9:10. It's 10 minutes. It'll be 9:10.
Perfect. Thanks. All right. And I think we'll be automatically put into the breakout room. Sometimes there's a pop-up button that says, do you want to join your group? So if that happens, please make sure to click that. Okay, yep. Please join now. Thank you for your patience.
Okay.
Okay, it looks like we're back in our main group, and others are joining as well. Awesome, awesome. Okay. For the person who's joined by phone, if you are able to join by computer, we do have visuals and some interactive pieces where it's helpful to be on the computer. If not, we'll still be happy to share everything afterwards if that helps. But if you can join by computer, that's preferable. All right. So how did it go? What did you learn about your groups? I believe there were 3 groups. So I'm going to choose someone randomly, and then when you, I'll open it up. So let's see. Does someone want to volunteer to go first? What did your group talk about?
Hey, Rebecca, I can go first. I can report out for my group.
Okay, okay.
So 3 main things that came out. There were 2 people in our group that didn't have experience with substantial damage or substantial improvement, and they're looking at absorbing a lot of this information and putting it into their policies and establishing some type of a guidance in their community as well. I did tell them that as part of this training, we hope to have a standard operating procedures completed to take away from this training. So they're excited about that. And the state has a regional approach to beach improvement areas and regulating those, in which they have substantial guidance included. And then the last one is that there's areas in Lewis that the properties, when they come in for permitting, are much greater than the actual the structure is worth. So we're seeing permits for for a $30,000 home probably, or property. The structure on the property, the property is probably selling for $200,000-300,000, but the structure itself is only worth $30,000, and they're coming in with a permit for $150,000-200,000. And so they have to explain what regulations are needed for substantial improvement and developing within the floodplain. And there's some difficulties there, as you could imagine. And also, most recently, within the last year, the prices of materials, and especially wood, has gone up substantially. So it doesn't make any type of a small improvement would be substantial. And that's what I got.
Awesome. All right. What about group number 2 or 3? Does someone else want to volunteer to go?
I guess I'll go. Hello. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay. My name is James Benson, and I work for the city of Wilmington in the zoning department. Primarily with the city of Wilmington, there's a lot of new challenges that we're facing in terms of substantial damage and improvement and things of that nature, because there's a lot of building up in the area, particularly in areas that didn't see a lot of development in the past. But overall in the group, we basically all are coming from different areas and different levels of myself, sort of somewhat fairly new to this aspect of things, but still in a learning process, of course. But pretty much my group members are in the same boat. Some have more experience than others, but definitely looking forward to what we can take from this training today.
Awesome, thanks. All right, and the last group?
Hey, Rebecca, this is David. For group 1, we had 3 towns represented in the group, and it just seems that the substantial damage practice or process really hasn't been, they haven't had the opportunity to use it too much. So it sounded like they're trying to piece together these plans and formulate that and familiarize themselves with these processes so that if and when the time comes, which most certainly it will at some time in the future, that these cities will be prepared to handle this.
Awesome. Excellent. That's great. You know, this is also just helpful for our own kind of approach, because having some folks who are on the newer side, some folks who have been around and want to talk through the technical details, some folks who are, you know, going to definitely be experiencing a lot of potential substantial damage with storms, sea level rise, all that kind of stuff. And then other folks where, you know, you might have a small number of structures in the SFHA, but every time there's a house fire or a tornado or so, like there may be other ways to kind of work with those homeowners and structure owners too. So that's great to hear such a mix. And at this point, I'm going to kick it over to Mark for the next section.
Great, thanks, Rebecca, and good morning, everybody. Just wanted to introduce myself quickly. My name is Mark James. I'm also with Michael Baker International. I work with Rebecca on a lot of national projects through the FEMA CERC program, and we also do quite a few projects regionally. A lot of my work is in Maryland. We started to work with Delaware most recently, and Philadelphia and Pennsylvania out of Rebecca's office. They do a lot of work in those communities. I'm based out of Alexandria and work out of the Baltimore office. So it's a little bit about me. I just, oh, you want me to take control? Okay. Maybe it's better if Lisa, if you take control. I don't know. I don't.
You might click a couple times to kind of get the remote control thing to work. Yeah, and then you should be able to move.
All right. Just give me a second here. I gotta get this worked out. So, I'd like to tell you that, well, first off, Rebecca had given you some information on background and the guidance document that we developed for Delaware, DNREC, and the first few steps that would be taken before the event. And so the guidance document is organized as a before, during, and then after. And so what I would maybe recommend is opening up that document, maybe on one of your screens, or if you printed it out, you could follow along and see the sequence of the document, because what we intend to do is turn that document over to the items that are identified in the document will mirror the standard operating procedures and the administrative procedures that will follow in the next section of the training. So you'll see that everything that's addressed in the guidance will come up again in another document that we hope to have you fill out and take away from this training. So they were all produced at the same time to match each other, so that we would be able to, you would be able to reference the document and also have a document that would be able to lay out each step and identify who's responsible, what steps are needed for each one of these sections of the guidance. So what I'll be doing is talking about the during and then the post-disaster or post-response period. So this, moving forward here, we look at the initial damage assessment. So this occurs as soon as you can get into the field and look at the damages that have occurred. This is referred to as the initial damage assessment. It's not the steps that are taken in the substantial damage to determine, if it's this damaged or not. This is really to identify those areas that have had the most impact and the areas where you want to concentrate your efforts to do substantial damage. And this is typically done by driving the area, or in some cases, if you can't access it, it may be done by drone. Sometimes I witnessed at a state level that there's a state helicopter that'll access these areas. Those are in larger events, but you know, for small communities, it's really just getting in the car with the staff that would be responsible for doing the damage assessments, and maybe some political officials, and going out looking at high water marks from flooding on your structures, or if it's a wind event, looking at damage to the roofs, and maybe if there's 2 floors, if there's partial damage to the second floor versus the first floor. If the roof is off, obviously, and there's been a storm event with high winds and rains, then you pretty well know that those homes that have that are in that condition are 100% damaged. So you can immediately identify in your initial damage assessment which homes kind of fall into that 0 to 50 and 50 to 100%. So that makes it really easy to determine where you have to concentrate your efforts. The other important thing is in this initial damage assessment is to photograph these properties, so that when FEMA or the state has questions to determine why you're focusing on one area and not the other area, you can provide them that information as soon as possible. As I said, you want to get out there as soon as it's safe, as soon as the water recedes or the winds have been reduced. So the next, two in advance. So you have to get a representative compilation of the structures that you're going to be evaluating. And so through this initial screening, you want to have several representative structure types. So you want to identify those that are in the 0 to 50 or 0 to 49%, and then those that are 50 and more. As I said, if the 50 to 100, those can be identified as 100% damage, and you go through the substantial damage process with them almost immediately. But the 0 to 50, that's where you have to concentrate on, and that's where you're going to have contingent or some contention between the homeowners and the municipality in determining what's substantially damaged and what's not, because that 0 to 60, which we're gonna, or the 40 to 60, which comes into play for the substantial damage we're going to be talking about soon, will have to be justified as well as well documented. So next slide. I think I skipped one there. Okay, there it is. So in determining the damage of a structure, as I said, there's a 0 to 40, 40 to 60, and 60 to 100%. So they fall within those three categories. Evaluating the damage to a structure before SISD determinations are completed will help you determine where inspection resources are needed in the most cases where the 40 to 60% damage is. So focusing your inspection on these areas, again, may be controversial between the homeowner and the municipality, because they're going to straddle that damage threshold, and you'll see in the later on when we're developing this standard operating procedures, you have to really get to the level of detail where you're looking at very specifics in a structure. And this is going beyond the drive-by window inspection. This is when you get into the house and you see that, you know, if it's a 2-level structure and there's only damage to half of the structure, then that's only half or 50%. There has to be the entire structure that's damaged, and that will go for any type of appliances or cabinets, for instance. If there's cabinets on the first floor and the second floor, and only the first floor is damaged, that's only 50%. So we'll be going through some exercises short in the next few sections to kind of gauge where you stand, or where you would be classifying a home at the 40 to 60% damaged. Okay. So the one thing that you have to be concerned with is being consistent with your municipality's floodplain ordinance and the building compliance for code compliance. You as a floodplain manager or a building code official, I know there's quite a few of you that are on the call today. They're the ones that are responsible for determining the structures and determining whether they've been substantially damaged or substantially improved. And that assessment will be presented to the city council or community council members to go through and identify that home has been damaged to a degree where it would be substantial substantial determination. So the determinations are made in accordance with local floodplain regulations and FEMA guidance. And that's why it's important that you have these as substantial damage and substantial improvement guidance that's identified in your floodplain regulations, or at least referenced in your floodplain regulations. What I've seen in the past is that you will have 2 documents, and that's why we set this up, so that you have a guidance document that provides the steps that are necessary, the people that are responsible, that can be easily referenced into other documents. And so your floodplain ordinance or your regulations that guide floodplain management don't have to go into a lot of detail for what is identified as substantial damage or improvement. It's really just a reference to an existing or another document. So the ordinance require permits for the repair of reconstruction or damaged structures. DNREC has an existing floodplain ordinance. It's a model ordinance that can be used for communities to adjust and make suitable for including substantial damage and substantial improvement. And then you can see in the link at the bottom of this slide, you can access that on the Delaware DNREC website. So another item that you have to be concerned with or aware of is the management and administration of the staff, as well as the procedures that would be needed to undertake substantial damage determination post-event. And the number of inspection teams needed for data collection is really based on the size of the inventory of that you're looking at. Again, that goes back to your initial assessment. If you have determined that there's only 200, 300 homes in one area, you can probably get that assessed within 2 to 3 days, depending on the number. If you have 4 staff that you can deploy to those areas, you can probably get that done within a week. Whereas if you had 1,000 homes and you only have 4 staff, that inventory is much larger, and it's going to take a lot more time to do the substantial damage in all those homes. So the inventory, the number of inspection team members that you have, that can be completed in a day, or completed in the identified scope of work that you've identified, that you have in your standard operating procedures, will depend on a number of these factors. So it's really important that you plan this out in advance, and that you are able to develop some type of data collection process that will increase the efficiency of your inspectors, as well as the time that's needed to collect the data. And so there's 4 tasks for accurate and complete data collection. So the first task is to determine and use the SISD tool or worksheet. So the SISD tool is a FEMA-based software program. Rebecca referred to it earlier for training purposes. So there is training, and there is the ability to download this from FEMA directly and use it to your ability. There are also worksheets that are available from FEMA. You'll see them very soon as part of an exercise for identifying substantial damage. The second task is to provide necessary tools and resources and assign someone to begin collecting the information. So you will have to have, if you're using the tool, and it's important that they either have that downloaded on a phone, or a better use is a tablet, to make sure that these are available, or you have the budget to purchase these and have them readily available when staff are deployed. And then the third task is to prepare guidance and any training materials. As we said before, there is training offered through Region 3, the state, as well as the Emergency Management Institute offers online courses, as well as courses that are in person. So it's really important to keep your staff trained for turnover, as well as to keep them up to date on new policies, programs, and procedures. And the last one, number 4, task 4, is to determine the inspection area for each team and plan the sequence of inspections. So it's really important that you're not duplicating efforts. A lot of times when you're in the field, there's areas that overlap, and it's important that if you're sending a team to one area, that they're not wasting their time and work on something that has already been determined. And so making sure that you have some type of a method where you document it and make it known that these properties or this area is being completed by a certain staff member. All right, so the next slide. We kind of touched on these, and this is the formula that you have to kind of put on have it in front of you. If it's a whiteboard that you're using, if it's some type of web EOC, make it known to all of the staff that are involved, or use this as kind of your guide to administer the event. It's pretty easy equation. It's the number of homes that you have times the number of minutes that you would need per home, divided by the number of team members. And that's how many hours you're going to have to estimate the substantial damage for that area. And again, make sure that this is identified for each area, not if there's 2 or 3 areas and you're sending a number of staff, or if you're taking responsibility for all of these areas, then you'll know how much time, whether it's hours or days, that will be needed or planned for that event. And remember too, this is you're not doing this. This is not going to probably be your only job during a disaster. You're going to be involved in, or you might be involved in many other ways. You may even have staff, or you may be experiencing personal damages as a result of the event as well. So you really have to manage your time well and make sure that the staff are accounted for and or supported by other staff if that is the case, where the staff is impacted by the event as well. Also, the rate of inspection by non-residential properties is likely to vary depending on the size and the complexity of the structure. So not only do you have to evaluate residential structures, but if there's commercial structures, business, different types of land uses that are being assessed, you'll have to be able to determine those based on maybe on the square footage of the property versus the number of homes. So there's different, you may have to consider some different equations or different scenarios when you're looking at non-residential structures. Your state support, and we're going to talk about this, as well as federal support that you have available, and the different ways that you can access that support. DEMA, Delaware Emergency Management Assistance Compact, is a compact, an agreement between different neighboring communities as well as different states. So Delaware has signed this compact under Title 20, Chapter 34 to provide through a memorandum of understanding the ability to ask and receive resources from other states or neighboring communities. And so during an event, if you are running short on staff, or if you need some type of equipment to do an assessment, through that EMAC agreement, that can be received from other states if they have that available, or if they are, if it's free, because in a lot of cases that they may be suffering from the same damages as you are, and so it may have to go to a state or a resource that's located further inland if it's a coastal storm that you're experiencing. And Maryland and Virginia and New Jersey, say for instance, are all experiencing that same storm. So mutual aid agreements and memorandum of understanding are essential components, especially of emergency management, planning, response, and recovery operations. These agreements provide a vehicle for emergency aid and assistance during and following emergencies and disasters. It's to increase availability, resources, and improve response and recovery efforts within the state and its communities. So it's important that when you do make these agreements, that you sign in a memorandum of of an understanding or some type of an agreement between communities, so that you guarantee that that trust and that availability for resources. There's also a state resource, and I found this out during the interviews that we conducted to a number of 8 communities that were identified in the state to put together this guidance. We interviewed these communities to see where they stood and determined what was needed and how we could put in place, or what we should put in place in the guidance to assist these communities. And it was made known that there is a Delaware emergency task force that extends beyond Delaware into 13 counties throughout the Delmarva Peninsula, including Delaware and or Maryland and Virginia. And so these counties share like regional responses through communication, resource sharing, shelter and evacuation strategies, and recovery plans. So that is something that you should really take advantage of as a community, or make it known, especially in your emergency management as well as your floodplain management documents and policies and programs. So we're going to a breakout room next. And for this breakout room, I want you to think about, again, you assign somebody the task of reporting out and documenting what's said. And the questions are, what are some of the best practices that you can share with the group? Things that you did in response that really made a difference in reducing the time and effort during long-term recovery efforts. And this puts, this kind of extends outside of substantial damage improvements into your long-term recovery efforts in a community. And do you have any specific stakeholders that were involved in your SDSI process? To name a few, possibly, like if you had a faith-based group that had contractors in their parish or in their group that would be that were of use in documenting substantial damage and substantial improvement, or even helping out in the emergency response role. If there's volunteers, maybe you have some maybe like a Lowe's or a Home Depot or private sector that also was very instrumental in response or long-term recovery. So with that, we can go to a breakout room. It is 9:45 right now, so we have 10 minutes. So we'll get back at 9:55. So join your group now, and we'll see you back in 10 minutes.
All right, looks like we're all rejoining. Mark, are you there?
I'm sorry, I got put on mute somehow. I was talking and nobody could hear me. So I said I'll brief out first on my group, and then we can move on from there. But I had three main points that kind of were identified in the group discussion. The first is that most of the participants had limited experience, and they're using this as kind of a learning approach to including substantial damage into their existing policies and programs, and becoming more educated on the declaration process and long-term recovery efforts. The other thing was the city of Seaford. They have a faith-based group that actually meets on a regular basis, and they are going to ask them to be included in their planning process for emergency response and recovery, and possibly help them out in doing some of the determinations that that they're expecting to conduct, and put this into their policies and administrative procedures. Milton has also had experience with faith-based organizations, knowledge of some groups that went to Katrina, and they look forward to making those contacts within the community. And then they also have a relationship with the Lions Club that has helped out and assisted them through declaration process, or not the recovering from an event, and are thinking about helping them through some of the damage assessments, or possibly housing them or using the facility if they have some type of a hall for shelter, or coordinating events. And that's what I got. How about the next person in the other groups?
I can go next. Our group has found that using substantial damage worksheets and substantial improvement worksheets has worked in a permitting process as far as what has worked. Fenwick Island has worked in removing substantial damage houses or in getting them raised. However, they said the paperwork can be very overwhelming. Sometimes property owners get frustrated by the process, or can't come up with their 25% cost share. Everybody seemed to say they saw less substantial damage and more substantial improvement, particularly in our coastal communities where money doesn't tend to be an issue. And as far as who we work with, in my role as a state agency, I usually work with the local officials when it comes to substantial damage and substantial improvement determinations. And Scott, who works with MS4 permits, says that working with businesses, that businesses are quick to work with them as far as meeting the needs.
That's great. Thank you. Those are some really insightful comments. Next group, do you have anything to report out on?
Yeah, this is Dave. So for group one, a lot of what you had said, Mark, I think a lot of the communities are just looking for more information. They really haven't had to deal with these things too much. Yeah. So they haven't really been able to develop any best practices. So this is a learning experience. And I think that was kind of prevalent in the surveys that we had conducted. And it seems to be the situation in Delaware, good and bad. But I think this is definitely a learning opportunity for most.
Yeah, that came up in our group as well. We talked about the 8 communities that we interviewed before any of this, and just to give you some background on this, those that weren't involved in the beginnings of the putting together this guidance document, is that we identified 8 communities in the state and spent about 2 weeks going through, contacting them, getting the point of contact that would be the most interactive and the most that had the most experience, and then put it out to that one point of contact, and then ask them to share it with others that they thought that would be instrumental in putting together or answering some of the questions that we had for their to go through what they have on file as substantial damage, substantial improvement, that determination process. And so it varied for some of the small communities. We just had interview with like the floodplain manager or the building code inspector, to some of the larger communities where we'd have representatives from emergency management, their planning department, as well as their codes and enforcement. So it varied between the different participants fairly significantly, but what we got out of it was very effective in putting together the guidance. And in fact, those a summary of the interviews, as well as the interviews themselves, that they were included as part of the guidance document and presented to DNREC. So they have those on file as well as the documents, the other documents that were created. So just wanted to thank everybody for their participation, and we can move on. We got a few more slides before we take a break, and I'm not being able to, well, it takes a while before you have to hit it a few times. So in establishing your substantial damage determination, when you go, the last few items that we talked about were determining the damage of the home or the structure, and that number is calculated and then compared to the value of the home. And in order to get the value of the home, you have to get the market value or listed value of the building before the damages had occurred. So going back, if there was an event that occurred in August, and you are able to get out there and do the damage assessment by the mid-August, and then you come back into the office and you need to put a value on the house before that event occurred. So you have to go back 2 months or 3 months into July or May, hopefully knowing that there's been no major market change in that community. So keep it within reason. You really shouldn't use an appraisal that was done a year or 2, 3 years before. You should keep it as close as possible. If you have that appraisal in hand, a lot of communities don't. And talking to the communities that have done substantial damage in Delaware in the past, they use an appraiser. And in most cases, the appraiser will put that value on the house as a certified licensed appraiser for what that property owner paid, or what the value of the house is at that current rate or current time just before the event occurred. And that value of the appraisal will be put or charged to the property owner as part of the permit process when they are issued the substantial damage determination, and have to go through the improvements through a permitting process that'll just be tagged on to that total. So you have the market value and you have the damage assessment or estimates that were completed as part of your determination. And so those two values are compared to give you whether that property is substantially damaged. So if the damages are more than the appraised value of the market value of the house, then you know that it falls into the category it being substantially damaged. That also, you will also be able to determine that 40 to 60 value. So if it's 40 or 40% greater than that number, then it can be determined as a substantially damaged home. There are a few items that are excluded from the cost when you're putting together your damage assessment. So those areas that are outside of the structure, so your lawn or outbuildings, if they are a sidewalk or driveway, if they're damaged, they cannot be included as part of the determination. Temporary stabilizing of the building for safety, that again is not included or cannot be included as the cost. So that means like if the home is compromised and the foundation has cracks in it and is also compromised, if you're installing some stabilizing mechanism to support the building, that cannot be included as a cost. And then if there's existing violations on the home, if it's been, the worst case scenario that I've seen is if the home has been condemned and then forgotten about, and then the damages occur, and then it turns out 2 weeks later, after the damages have been assessed, that there was actually these homes have been condemned in the past, but it just kind of like got lost in paperwork. That's an example where they cannot be included as part of the cost. And of course, the substantial damage estimator, the tool, it's an electronic tool that can be easily used to download it and use to determine the determinations for substantial damage or substantial improvement. There's there's 3 different options that you can use as a local official for determining substantial damage. The first is the estimator tool, which we just talked about. The second one is qualified estimates of cost prepared by you, the local officials, by using your professional judgment, knowledge of construction costs. And then the third is estimates from qualified contractors, engineers, or architects to provide the applicant and found acceptable to the local officials or the floodplain managers. So you can contract that work out as well. It's not advancing. There you go. So after your substantial damage determination has been identified, you have to notify the homeowner or the property owner. And this is usually done within 2 weeks of the event. That's kind of the threshold, the given threshold that FEMA has set in their guidance. There's always a case where they may need an extension, or it may take longer depending on, again, the size of the event, the staff that you have, and the ability to get in and out of those areas to do the determination. In any case, the notification should be identified as a letter, and as part of the guidance, there are form letters, sample letters that you can use as a floodplain manager or somebody that's going to be notifying the property owner. So those are all useful resources that are attached to the guidance document, and you can see that if you go flip through the whole document to the back. And then we also want to talk about appeals, and the appeal is made by or to a municipal panel. This is a board that's set by each municipality. They usually have this already in place for other permitting and infractions on, or either land use or zoning infractions that will have to be addressed by the municipality. So your substantial damage, substantial improvement determinations will also be appealed to that same board. And I remember when we did the interviews, a lot of the communities, in fact, I think all the communities have some type of a board that appeals are brought to. And the homeowner, the property owner may provide the following types of documentation as proof to that appeal. The first is if they have recent building appraisals by a licensed and qualified real estate appraiser. Again, that should match the appraisal that you get from your determination. But if there's good reason that they have an appraisal that's higher, you'll probably have to honor that. But you'll be in a discussion with the homeowner and determine like whose appraisal is correct. But in any case, the appraisal has to document the structure's market value. Again, as I said, pre-damage event, and the homeowner may be able to bring project repair costs that were identified, that have been put together by certified and qualified contractor, professional engineers, or insurance adjustment documentation. So those are the two things that you will see as part of an appeal process. The appeal is typically issued or brought up by the property owner because there's insufficient information or there's errors that they feel that are in the substantial damage determination. And you usually see these appeals not in the 50 to 100% or those damages over that are the determinations that are over between 60 and 100%, but it's that 40 to 60 that can that level that we talked about before. And that's why it's really important that you document, I said this before, what you have, what you consider in that 40 to 60%, and any type of housing or any type of structure that you are able to draw that line between the percentage improved or damaged. The repairs or improvement costs that should be included or excluded. So the homeowner may disagree with the assessment that you did in saying that, I don't need to have all my windows replaced. Only 3 of them were broken, and so that's all. That's 30% versus, if they had 10 windows in the home, it's only 30% versus 50%, and that's an argument that they could bring up. There might be some other items within the determination that would also fall under the 40 to 60% or below the 40% that would not identify them as substantially damaged. The third is inappropriate valuations on costs for the proposed work. So in your value or in your judgment of putting a cost to the damages, they may feel that that cost is not representative of the true value of the property. Or it could be, in their case, they're going to say that it's not going to be as costly. It'd be less to do that improvement or replace the cabinets, for instance, in a house, or the siding than what was documented in the determination. And then inappropriate method used for determining market value of the building. So this falls back on the appraiser and what they're responsible for. That's included in the assessment. So we're going to the next slide. And so this is a polling question. So the question is, does your floodplain ordinance need revision? So if every community should have a floodplain ordinance if they're in the NFIP. So if it does need to be revised, where do you think and what should be included in that revision? So that the first is, yes, we have had a lot of variances. The second is, yes, other, please explain. And you're starting to, if you see on the right-hand side of the screen, The time elapsed is 10 seconds. We have a minute to do this. I'll run through the others. No, we recently updated the floodplain ordinance. No, but the council needs to understand more about it. No, but our zoning board and appeals need to understand more about it. Or no, and other, please explain, or you don't know. So we'll just got about 30 seconds left. And we'll just say we have 2 more slides for this section, and then we're gonna have a breakout, and then we'll do a break, a 15-minute break, so you can walk away, get a coffee, and we'll be back.
And the poll results are tabulating now.
Okay, thank you, Alyssa. And yeah, we have a lot of no answers and a lot of I don't knows. So it's consistent with what we saw in some of the breakout rooms, is that there's a lot of people here that don't have a lot of experience in this field, and that's great because they're getting it now, and hopefully they'll be able to go back to the office and put in place some of the policies and programs, the things that we're sharing today. There's a few that I can't read the whole thing. In the no, but council needs to understand it. So there's a disconnect between council and I guess zoning board of appeals as well. Then between them and the floodplain managers or the building code officials that are in the field or on the ground working with floodplain ordinance. That's interesting. So I'm going to move on. As I said, we got 2 more slides in this section, and it deals with hazard mitigation assistance and increased cost of compliance. So the increased cost of compliance. This is some of you already know. It's a program that FEMA offers for homeowners and property owners that have experienced substantial damage, and it pays up to $30,000 for those property owners to make the improvements in their home so that it can be brought up to the compliance codes that the community enforces. And so this is kind of like it's really like a helping hand. So like if you've incurred these damages, we understand that you weren't really looking at you were just looking at replacing your floors, but you really weren't looking at having to update all of your electrical or all of your plumbing because it's out of compliance. So they will provide you up to $30,000 to do that work that is needed to bring the home up to code. The one nice thing is that these funds, we're going to talk about this in the next slide, but the funds are used, or they can be used, to match FEMA hazard mitigation assistance grants. The grants are typically what you see these grants used for, specifically for homes or residential structures, is to elevate the structure. And so in general, an elevation cost for a 2-story, 3-bedroom home, 2,500 square foot home, you're looking at probably close to $200,000 or over $200,000 to elevate that home. And so that grant is a 75% grant. So 75% of the $200,000 will be provided by FEMA. But the 25% is on the homeowner or in the community. In most cases, it's on the community. Or I'm sorry, in most cases, it's not on the community. It's on the homeowner to support that 25%. Sometimes states or communities have some type of a rainy day fund where they're able to like pull some funds out of to support these types of efforts. But The ICC, increased cost of compliance, that $30,000 can be utilized to as a match on that hazard mitigation grant. So that's really good to know, especially if you're reaching out to communities and promoting substantial damage, as well as floodplain management regulations, that you make them aware of the increased cost of compliance, as well how it interacts with other programs, including the HMA. And the hazard mitigation grants that are available, there's 3 of them. Just trying to get to the next slide. Right. Cool. Does everybody see that? It went really large, but okay. There's 3 main programs: that HMGP, which is the Hazard Mitigation Grant Program, the Flood Mitigation Assistance, and the Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities Grant. The first one is disaster driven. So depending on the amount of money that's identified for that declaration, 15% of it is given to HMGP to put back into the community to make it more resilient. One of which being the elevation of homes. And as I said, it matches really well because this money is provided soon after the declaration, at the same time that, hopefully, at the same time that the homeowners are rebuilding or reconstructing their home and getting an ICC, increased cost of compliance, those dollars. So in a theoretical situation, or a perfect situation, the declaration happens, the funding gets a bit provided by, or your homeowner, the homeowner is substantially damaged. The funds for hazard mitigation grant program are issued a month after the declaration, and then the ICC funds will be issued at the same time. And when the homeowner goes to elevate the home, they're going to be able to apply for the hazard mitigation grant program and support the 25% with the ICC funds. The one drawback to this is it's close to about a year, 6 months to the year before they get the funding back out to the homeowner. So a lot of the times homeowners are not willing to wait that long, or they just don't have the ability to be out of their home for 6 months. The second one is FMA. This and the BRIC are annual. They're not declaration based, so they're provided on an annual basis. And the FMA are funds that are collected and supported by the NFIP program. So those support property owners that are policyholders in the NFIP for elevation acquisition, floodproofing, any type of mitigation measures that would be deemed suitable by FEMA. Well, the other thing is repetitive loss properties and severe repetitive loss properties are priority under the FMA. And then the last one is the BRIC. This used to be the PDM, Pre-Disaster Mitigation Grant Program. That this is annual as well, and it applies to all types of projects, mainly large infrastructure projects, and watershed projects that would provide mitigation community-wide. It also does smaller projects like elevations, acquisitions, floodproofing for independent structures. So a wide range of projects that can be offered in that program. I did see a comment. I just have to take a second and read it. Gina said, HMGP funds are currently being made available. Yes, they are. Delaware Association with TS Isaacs, which was a presidential declaration. So it looks like you have these funds available now through Delaware, through the storm that was, I think it was last year around really early season in July, the Hurricane Isaias, which puts this into perspective. A lot of the times these funds are available, and they it's not known by a lot of these communities that they come and go. And the worst thing that you want, as I said, I was a hazard mitigation officer for Maryland, and the last thing you want to do is return those funds back to FEMA. So make sure that they are they're spent. All right, so the next slide, we have a breakout room. As I said, this will be the last breakout room, and then we're going to questions, and we're going to have a break. And I think, Dave, is it 15-minute break? Is that going to be good?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
Oh, we're running behind. Can we actually make that more like a 5-minute break?
Okay.
Okay.
All right. So the breakout room, we're going to again, make sure you have somebody to make notes and report out. And have you incurred problems notifying residents? How do you handle this situation? And have you been involved in applying for and managing FEMA grant or ICC mitigation measures for damaged properties? So if we go to breakout now, join, and we'll report out in 10 minutes. All right, I guess we're all back. And can you hear me, Rebecca? I think I got it off mute. Okay. Yeah, when you come back, it goes to mute for some reason. So you gotta make sure that it's off mute. So the results, we can go through each group. I'll report out on what we found in our group. Three main things is that we haven't had experience mostly with ICC or HMGP. And the one participant said that they've seen or they've heard that there's a lot of problems with elevations. I can attest to that as well, that there's limited resources and also the commitment and the liability for communities to undertake these types of projects is very high. Seaford has a Facebook post and they use that to put out a lot of the publications and notices during events. They prefer a door-to-door, and most of the areas that are in the floodplain in Seaford are not residential, but mainly industrial. Purdue, and there's some large barging operations that transport rock and gravel into the inland, and those are their main concerns, and they have a good relationship with all of them and are able to communicate. By mainly, they prefer by letter, as I said, door to door, and that's it. That's all I got.
Here's a Dave for group one. We did talk about these things. A lot of our groups, a lot of our towns in our group have had experience with hazard mitigation grants, and currently have some going with the city of Lewis, as well as even DNREC has a grant to do some work in Lewis. Some of the communities have already, had the ability to communicate with their residents about ongoing concerns and mitigation projects. It sounds like Ellesmere has a really good working condition with their local businesses, that where they feel that the businesses, and them can work together to provide each other either with what they need to get the job done, which is really good. And it's a working relationship is very important. Again, they've had experience in applying for FEMA grants or hazard mitigation grants.
Excellent. That's good to hear. I'm glad they're taking advantage of that, especially even with as Gina pointed out, the Isaias grants for HMGP are available still currently. So good to know. And the other group?
I can report out for our group. So we talked a bit about the actual grant process and how it can be really beneficial, but also a lot of times there's a lot of paperwork and you really have to stay on top of the reimbursements, and how the kind of ability to tap into some of this varies by community. So in a more affluent community, the 25% match is pretty easy, but in others, they may not go after certain things. And we talked a lot about kind of outreach and the political will side of things. So for instance, Milford uses substantial improvement for renovations and new construction, but a lot of folks kind of have a little bit of a reactive approach with some of these communications. And then we talked a little bit about, like, where are you pushing for higher standards and really trying to kind of move your community forward, and how folks are pushing back on even the minimum standards. So it's a tough spot to be in.
Definitely. Great, thank you, Rebecca. I guess now we'll take a 5-minute break, and we'll meet back at 10:50. And during that time, if there's any questions, if you want to stay on, or comments, we can do that as well. But when we come back, we'll be looking at going through your standard operating procedures and setting up your administration procedure. Hey, Rebecca,
Uh-huh.
did you want to maybe skip the polling questions in this next section?
To make up some of the time. Yeah, I think that's a good call.
I don't think we need to have that polling. And then even the breakout room, where that might be an option.
I was
'Cause
thinking maybe it'd make breakout rooms just like 5 minutes, so people just kind of share one quick snippet and then move on or something.
Yeah, because I found with the breakout rooms, there's a lot of silence too, and trying to make discussion. So I think that the 5 minutes would be fine, and we can adjust it, right?
Yeah, I checked in with Alyssa, and Alyssa, feel free to jump in. I think that should work.
Because the what to inspect, that section, I think we can go to that really quick. And we don't have to like give a lot of details. We just kind of like look at each picture and say, these are what you need to look for. We can get through that section probably within like 10 minutes, 15 minutes.
Okay. We can do the exercises as a big group thing too, if we need to.
Yeah. I think that might be good. And just kind of like walk through it and not have them, maybe give them like 2 to 5 minutes to pull up their own format, and then just provide the answer and walk through the answers really quick.
Sounds good.
Okay. Yeah, I don't think we need to break out for the others as well. So yeah, this should be fine. We'll get it. Hey, Rebecca, I guess maybe it's because we got multiple presenters that it's having a hard time shifting through the slides. I've never had that happen before.
I think it's the new WebEx, because those click controls are just, they're like sticking or something.
Yeah. It's weird.
I have no problem clicking through the slides if that's easier. That would be fine with me.
Thanks. I think for my section, I'll still suffer through. If I get too stuck, we'll switch. But it seems like sometimes it works. I just end up hitting each slide like 4 times.
Yeah, I know. And what I ended up doing was like clicking through 2 slides and having to go back. So.
Yeah. Well, it looks like there are a number of folks still here. If you do have any questions, feel free to use the chat box or unmute yourself and ask away. This time is for you, and we recognize we're throwing a lot at you, so we want to make sure there's space for everyone to ask kind of what's on your mind, or share best practices, or whatever.
I don't know. I don't think did we get some more people? There might be a few others that joined. Jeff Shockley. I don't remember.
For anyone who joined a little bit late, if you scroll up in the chat, you can see the link to the packet of materials we sent out beforehand. And if you haven't downloaded that, I'd recommend it. Would recommend it because you'll be able to see the worksheets and that kind of stuff. You can pull it up on your computer and type in as you go. to make this hopefully as valuable as possible for you.
All right, Rebecca, it's 10:50 now. If you want to start off with the administrative procedures.
Yep. All right, welcome back, everyone. Thank you for your continued attention. And, you know, it's interesting, this can be so technical, and also some of the stuff is so big picture, you know, with, you have to go find an area with the damaged homes. And so hopefully we're answering questions as we go along and that kind of stuff. If there's something where you think you have more questions, you want to concentrate more time, or you think everyone probably gets it and we can move faster, feel free to let us know, either by replying to everyone or messaging individually to Mark or to me, and we'll make sure that we're aligning with what you want from this training. Okay, so for setting up your administrative procedure, in the packet of materials, again, if you scroll up in the chat box, you can see the link to the FTP site where you can download those materials. I also emailed it out a couple days ago. And in there, one of the materials you can see is the administrative procedure, the standard operating procedure. And so for this next section, we're going to talk about what goes into it. And we found that it's helpful for communities and for representatives from the communities to just fill in everything you can as we go. And the thought here is some stuff you're going to know, no problem. Oh, I can fill this in my sleep. And other things you're going to say, I don't know the answer to that one. And it's good to be filling it in as you go, because then you can highlight that section and say, oof, someone else needs to answer this. Who am I going to ask? Or, you know, I got to follow up with, you know, that guy from building codes, or, you know, whatever the case may be. And it's so easy to kind of go through and nod along and be like, yeah, I think we've got it. And then suddenly when you're in a disaster, realize, oof, we never figured that piece out. So if you can pull up your worksheet now, and as we go through, feel free to just make notes to yourself, and they can be answers to the questions and prompts and kind of filling it in formally, or it could even be just, you know, highlighting, bolding, putting in purple text, whatever works best for you. I don't know this, so we need to find the answer here. When we've used a similar kind of worksheet with other communities, we found that it really helped to kind of shift the discussion. So instead of just talking in vague kind of, oh, you should do this, you should do that, the communities were able to say, I actually don't know, like, where would I find this? And then it's much easier for all of us to either provide that support and guidance, or, you know, for your neighbors to say, oh, here's what I filled in, and to be able to kind of share best practices. So the thought with this procedure is really to help set up documentation on what you ideally would do as a community. So if you've been doing this for a long time, you may know exactly what you would do. And in that case, this is just formally documenting it so that if, let's say, you go on vacation, someone else can know what to do. Or if you're newer to this process, then it's a great chance to be like, what is this document? What is the expectation of that? Who would I talk? And to really kind of get the lay of the land now instead of during the disaster. So, you know, it's also good to think about what is your end goal with this. So for some communities, for instance, they will adopt it as a standalone document. Their council will approve it, and then that's just their SISD administrative procedure. For others, they'll amend their emergency operations plan and it goes there. Or, you know, so if you think about kind of who you want to make sure is regularly reviewing this document and what kind of training they need, that might inform where you kind of plug it into your system. Okay, and you know, as with the rest of this, this is meant to be a guide and to give you some tips and tricks and ideas for how to think about this. There might be some things that are specific to your community that we don't have prompts for, but you know, you need to include, or things that we do have prompts for and they don't apply. So please make sure as we go through that you're thinking about what does this actually look like for your community. All All right, so the first step is really focusing on regulatory and legislative authority. And the thought here is you're going to be telling people, you know, sometimes that their home is damaged and they need to spend a lot of money to repair it, or, you know, to figure out what their next steps are. It's good to know what you can lean on for where you're getting that authority from. So there have been a number of comments and questions and discussions so far about that floodplain ordinance and if it has kind of the pieces that you need in it. And, you know, it's such a important document, obviously required to be a participating community in the NFIP. You have to have a floodplain ordinance or sections in other ordinances that relate to the floodplain. And it's really, that's where you're defining, like, what are we considering the floodplain? What are we mandating as our requirements, as our baseline? Where's the space where we can push a little further? You know what? We know that this neighborhood has a lot of severe repetitive loss properties. We need to find a way to really get them to shift something. We're going to change our ordinances to, I mean, you can't target a specific neighborhood, but like we're going to change our ordinance to just raise to a higher standard for everyone with the hopes that it'll help them rebuild to a higher standard too. Because there's so much discussion on, you know, well, the homeowner doesn't want to do this, or they don't think that's fair, or what. And, you know, at the end of the day, like, your community members matter a lot, and how you're working with them matters a lot. But also in the big picture, a lot of disasters are not going to take that part into account. And, you know, oh, well, the homeowner didn't think that was a good choice. Like, if the home is destroyed and the debris from that home is going downstream, like, that's going to potentially cause a lot of damage elsewhere too, and put additional community members at risk. So it's no longer just one homeowner making the decision for themselves and their property, but it's actually impacting your whole community. And so really thinking about what can you do to help make sure that your community is reducing their risk in the long term on the individual property level, and then also in the big picture across multiple properties. And so that authority, you know, comes from your building codes, it comes from your floodplain ordinance, any zoning, land use ordinances, or other guidance that might be specific to your community. You know, I know some folks talked about like the MS4 permitting. Like, there are a whole bunch of different pieces and ways that you can address this, but that's what you'll want to know and be able to point to when you're having some of these conversations. And, you know, in one community, it came up that the building code and the floodplain ordinance actually had some conflicting language. And so they realized that if they go to enforce this for substantial improvement, substantial damage, the homeowners might actually be able, and the structure owners might actually be able to say, oh, I'm actually going to follow this one, because there was no statement of which was the higher priority and like some of those pieces. And again, also the documents, agreements, and processes that are in place, or could be like your emergency operating procedures, your memorandums of understanding, all that ties into your authority. So if, you know, your language in your community is written that, you know, only, let's say, your council president has this authority, but that person can designate that the authority goes over here during an emergency, or, you know, like figuring out kind of where that is really helps inform what your process is. Because if all that authority, for instance, to, let's say, make a determination can only be with the FPA, then when you're thinking about how you're going to do this, that FPA needs to be available to be making those determinations, for example. So the first page, the first prompt is just asking, you know, substantial improvement, substantial damage procedures are established and regulated as per blank. So this is where you can point out, like, where is this language? And then additionally, there's other information found over here. This is just another spot, like, if you know it's in your floodplain ordinance and also it's in your building codes, feel free to write those in. Or it's, you know, in some other spot. And then to think about kind of how are you passing that authority as needed, for instance, an MOU. So I'll pause for 1 second and just ask folks to type in the chat what are some of the responses you are putting in? If it's easier to unmute and just speak, that's okay. All right. Well, while you think about it, I really do encourage you, if you can fill this in as you go, you know, there's a lot of times people are like, oh, you know what, I'm newer, like, I don't know these answers, I'm just trying to learn. But at the same time, like, for some of your communities, you may be the person who needs to know these answers. So if you don't know it, it's still good to kind of highlight, hey, this is one I need to ask someone about. I was working with a community a while ago where the town manager, you know, walked into the meeting. I was telling a few of you during the breakout session, walked into the meeting really confident about, we're going to get this, it's going to be great. Had the building code folks there, the code enforcement officer, all these different folks, and was confident it was going to be a quick, easy, you know, half hour, fill in the form and go. And then realized on page 1 that there were a lot of questions that that person didn't know. And so all of a sudden it went from this, oh, I got this, is no problem, to, okay, who else should I quickly call into this meeting? And it's, yeah, so if you can fill this in as we go, that'd be great. It'll help you. And then for community engagement, you know, we've touched on this a bit in some of the breakout sessions, but really thinking about even in, as we call it, blue skies, like non-emergent times, what triggers information sharing? How are you sharing information with your community? How are you sharing information externally with other, you know, maybe it's not the structure owners, and what decisions can you make ahead of time? So thinking about kind of what procedures do you have in place right now that you can lean on will help you figure out what you need to put in place specifically for substantial improvement, substantial damage. So for example, there's a community where they keep a list of all the contractors that they see working in the area, or anyone who's applying for a permit, and they keep all their contact information. And then anytime there's a major storm, or maybe they have a building code change or something like that, they'll email the contractors ahead of time and say, hey, just as a heads up, this is going into effect. And the thought there is, you know, those are the people who are going to be encouraging the structure owners to apply for permits, and or they might be applying for the permits themselves. They're a good audience to make sure you're engaging. Or, you know, for a lot of the folks on the phone, you might be thinking about how am I communicating with structure owners, you know, like if this is, let's say, their second home and they're not there all year round. What do I do if there's a disaster when they're not there? Or if it's a rental property, are my communications different for a rental and to renters than to homeowners? And thinking through what decisions can you make ahead of time. So this ties into like, who are you working with? So if it, you know, there might need to be a lot of updates to the website to share information quickly, who can you task that out to? Well, if it's the same person that you're planning is in the field doing determinations, how are you planning to do that? Are you going to make sure that they have a tablet and can be doing real-time updates ever? Like, that's still a lot to ask. Maybe there's someone else who can step in. So for this section of the sheet, you know, just looking through kind of what are your communication methods pre and post event, thinking about what might inform that. So if the power goes out and people can't charge their cell phones or, you know, go online, do you have a strategy with, you know, like leaving flyers under people's doors or putting them on certain street corners, or, you know, how are you communicating to people? And then the second part of that is how are you communicating substantial damage information and substantial improvement information so that folks know, hey, you might have to come into compliance. You might have to actually rebuild in a different way. You can't just go ahead and put up that drywall. And then thinking about how are you making sure that your communications are landing? You know, so it's nice to say, oh, I put up these flyers in these 10 locations, but if no one's looking for them there, how do you know your message is actually getting received? So I'll pause again for a second and just see, anyone have any comments, questions, we're picking up the speed a little because we, you know, wanted to take a while to really lay the base in the first two sections, and now this is about really applying it. So I'll be going pretty quickly, but at the same time, the goal is to make sure that this is helpful to you. So please feel free to ask any questions, to type any comments in the chat box so that this can be useful to you. And I think we're going to do well, roulette, where I'm going to choose a random person and ask them to report out. So for example, for this one, Robin, if you don't mind me putting you on the spot, can you tell me something that you're doing in Lewis? And you might need to unmute yourself. Alyssa, do you know if it's an option for him to unmute?
Yes, I think it should be.
Okay. Well, my plan to call on random people may not work if if not. Robin, can you type in the chat something that you do for communication, either pre-event, post-event, how you're assessing the efficacy of your communication? I'm talking to Robin Davis. Okay. And while we wait for that, Terry, if you don't mind also jumping in, please feel free to unmute and add a comment for Fenwick Island.
Hi, this is Terry. How do we communicate? We do community engagement throughout the year, and we have posted on our website information about flooding and floodplain, so that it's like an informational thing. We also, throughout the year, will use our website and community engagements, a lot of times email.
Excellent.
We also have an electronic message sign that if there's a pending storm or something, that can be used. There's all, you know.
Thanks. Yeah, thinking about all types of communication, those variable message signs can be incredibly valuable. Even if it's just telling someone to go to a website or a certain address or something like that. I know.
We also use, our community is older, so a lot of times, this is probably before COVID, but we would have rack cards that with that information on, because sometimes older people aren't as computer literate as younger people, but that is slowly changing as things evolve. But there's a variety of methods.
Excellent.
Hey, Rebecca, I just want to add, under the 5% grant for HMGP, you can, as a community, you can apply for those VMS signs, those variable message signs. So that you know there is some money that's available under HMGP from SIS. Now is the time, if there's any 5% funds left, you can apply for those VMS signs.
And I've been told this, the sign, our sign, this is Terry again from Fenwick. I think that's how our sign was actually purchased, through those grants.
Yeah, you see it quite often. They fall under alert and warning.
Awesome. Good call. I know one of the communities we worked with actually set up a permitting tent at the perimeter of this neighborhood that they knew regularly flooded, and the thought was it would ease some of the communication, so folks would know where even just in their neighborhood to go to for guidance, and also it helped them be able to see any drywall moving in and out, contractors parking at specific residents, and make sure that they were getting permits. So it kind of was a double win in kind of their outreach approach, and also helping make sure folks were in compliance before they did all their work. All right, let's see. And then the next one, let's see, did I go too far? Nope, okay. The next one is determining the impact area. So this is one that Mark talked a little bit about initially, but you know, the amount of time it takes you to communicate to your structure owners if they are substantially damaged or substantially improved, but mostly damaged, is really important. That amount of time, ideally, you're turning information around really quick, at least to tell them, hey, we're going to be sending you a determination, hold on a minute. But I think, Mark, you mentioned like 2 weeks if needed, and ideally it's even faster too. So that's kind of like your benchmark of if you have to, you can, but like, you know, as soon as the water recedes, people are assuming it's from a flood, people are going to be rebuilding. And it's the same, I mean, even if it's a house fire, that structure owner or homeowner is going to try to rebuild as quickly as possible because, you know, that's their home. And so thinking about where is the area that's been impacted and how are you reaching out to them, this whole section is going to be looking at like how do you collect that information quickly so that you can figure out your strategy. So, you know, how you reach out to repetitive loss properties may be even, or should definitely be included in how you're looking at it, because they're already on kind of a vulnerable list. They already are eligible for some funding, and also they may be more open to being bought out or elevating and that kind of thing. And then also, as already discussed, like what kind of materials can you have pre-printed to use? So for this section, you know, it's really thinking about like, where is the damage area? For one community we worked with, they put different marks on a telephone pole on a few telephone poles in the area, in the neighborhood that flooded regularly. And so they could see very quickly, when it gets to this mark, we know that there will probably be substantial damage determination just by the sheer height of the water. If it's at this mark, 50, you know, so thinking about kind of how you're even just figuring out what the damage area is going to be important. I know when I worked in emergency management for Philly, we had a lot of flooding, and we were monitoring, you know, our go-to flooded neighborhoods regularly and doing outreach. And then there was this surprise other neighborhood, and it turns out that they had some stormwater infrastructure issues, and they were flooding from the event too. But, you know, it's good to think about not only kind of your known impact areas, but then also how will you gain additional information if there's another area, or if if it's not maybe a flood, maybe it's a winter storm, a fire, something where the area might not be an obvious, you know, one neighborhood or one elevation level. So, and so the first step, you know, or part of it is figuring out the area and then figuring out who can help with this, who's at your kind of, who's available to you, who can work overtime, who can work their regular time, who is trained on this, and what responsibilities do you want these folks to have? What tools do they need to do their jobs effectively? You know, so as we've mentioned throughout, consistency is really important here, because if you have two homes and they are similarly damaged and one gets declared substantially damaged and the other is declared 49% not substantial, you know, like just under that threshold, the structure owners may appeal and may push, and it ends up taking a long time, taking up a lot of your staff time, but also you may end up kind of chipping away at the authority of your floodplain ordinance, for example. So it's ideally these assessments are done so consistently across your teams, across the people, that it never has to go that far. All right, so if you can take a minute and just start filling in kind of who would you work with on this? And for folks who are newer, you know, it's good to think about like who's on your emergency response teams. And, you know, some folks were mentioning faith-based organizations earlier as kind of your backup people. FEMA does, and at least feel free to jump it, but I think they typically have, or they work on CERT teams, the community response teams. So you might be able to set up, you know, just interested people joining these teams, but just be aware, like when you have people who don't do this all the time, once again, you may have consistency issues. So figuring out how you structure that, you know, maybe in the areas you know are heavily damaged, you send the teams that are just going to be declaring all of those homes, you know, destroyed. And then the areas where it's the 40 to 60%, that's where you send the teams that are more highly trained or have been doing this for longer, or, you know, so thinking about kind of who your people are and how you're going to use them, how you're going to make sure they're trained and able to work together. I know for, you know, it varies by community and by how many people you have there. I think it was in Norfolk we were working with, and they actually assign their staff to specific census tracts, and it's always the same, with the thought that if there's a big storm and, you know, and lots of flooding and the signs go away, or, you know, they want people who have walked that neighborhood enough times that they'll still be able to know where the parcel lines are and that kind of stuff, whether or not those indicators are there. So, and then this is really kind of that part I was mentioning before, where determining the timeframes is so important. So thinking about what's the extent of the area affected, how many structures have been affected, how many people do you have that can do the inspections, how long will it take? So if it's a neighborhood where someone can walk house to house, you know, and it's a 1 minute walk between houses, you're going to be able to get through a lot more homes. If it's something where you have to drive and then park and then drive and then park, that might take a lot longer. And also that might vary by what the disaster is. You know, if it's a snowstorm and you're, and there's tons of snow, people aren't going to be walking by foot on likely unshoveled pathways. So thinking about all that informs your strategy, because if you're starting to realize, as Mark had pointed out earlier, you have a lot of impacted homes and you don't have many people to do that outreach, you may need to suddenly send a message to everyone saying, hey, it's going to take us a while to get these determinations out, but just FYI, here's what might be coming your way, so that they know ahead of time, oof, it's risky if we start rebuilding now, you know, or maybe, you know, oh, we can do this in 3 days. We can skip that message. We're just going to get those determinations out. But it's all connected and really informs kind of what your strategy is. So it's good to be thinking through that now for kind of how you make those decisions and who is kind of leading those different efforts. And, you know, throughout also how you're even just structuring your team to make sure that there is that kind of quality check on the data being provided and on who's inputting that information, because it takes a long time. You know, folks have talked earlier about the amount of paperwork involved in a lot of these grants, and there's also a lot of paperwork with substantial improvement and substantial damage. All right, so let's see. Went too far. So, you know, I talked about strategy and your methodology. Oh, go ahead, Mark.
Are these my sections here? Did you want to just go back?
Oh, I thought we were switching at slide 44, but that's fine if you want to go.
But yeah, if you go back just to slide 39. Next. Time. You just finished timeframes, right? So it would be slide 41, just to give them a chance to look at that, and then I'll do establishing the establishing process and methodology. Yeah.
Oh, the floor is yours.
No, okay. Well, do you want to just finish off with the time frame, and then I'll take the next slide.
Sure. So I guess I'm going to put someone on the spot again and just see how you would fill in this form. So I'm going to go to Scott Allen. If you don't mind unmuting and just let me know, how would you fill this in? What are some of the factors that come into play for your community? It looks like Scott's still on mute. I'm going to choose someone else. How about Rob Pierce?
I haven't had to do this yet, but I do know I have three building or / code officials plus myself, so we would kind of split maybe into 2 teams and try to gauge an overall scope of how many structures would be involved to come up with how long this would take us. And obviously, if it's anything beyond, you know, if it's a significant event, we'd have to kind of jump into our our partnerships with other jurisdictions if we did have any in place, which we currently don't. So sounds like we have to do a little planning on our side.
Nice. Yeah, and that's a good point too. You know, even if you have those MOUs and everything in place, figuring out what triggers them. Like, what is the threshold where you say, oof, our 4 people can't do it, we need to look outside? And how do you structure that? Do you say, okay, you know, team from this neighboring community, you're just taking on this neighborhood? Or do you set it up where the 4 of you then become kind of the leads and you each are overseeing a team? You know, thinking about some of those pieces too can be really helpful in this space as well. Excellent. All right, Mark, all you.
Great. Thanks, Rebecca. You want to just keep doing the slides in, and I'll just go from here, or do you want me to share like I did before?
Yeah, I click forward for you, no problem.
All right, thank you. So yeah, continuing on from where Rebecca left off, as the guidance points out, or if you're following along with the guidance or what we presented in the first part of the training, these are all linked to the sections that are identified in the guidance. As Rebecca said, or what she was discussing was she's providing background on who you should have, the time frame, and your initial assessment. And what I'm going to be doing is looking at putting together your standard operating procedures for the methodology for conducting the damage assessment, communicating to your partners. Remember, we talked about state and federal partners and establishing your MOUs, and the mitigation or the emergency compact that supports Delaware as well as the other communities in Maryland and adjoining states. And then we're going to look at communicating damages to the homeowner and the methods that you will be that you'll use in communicating the substantial damage determinations to them, as well as looking at the appeal process and then monitoring your substantial damage determination. So going back to the methodology, and this is really the process that you need to put in place. Remember, we talked about the initial damage assessment and then your substantial damage assessment. So Rebecca talked about the steps that would be involved in the initial steps and the reasons, or I guess the importance of doing that. We're going to further look into that in this section, as well as identifying, more importantly, identifying that 40 to 60% damage range. And it's really, as I said before, it's really important that you document this, because you're going to be held, or somebody's going to be held accountable in determining that structure is being substantially damaged or substantially improved. And so this is where you line up or identify all the points that you will be considering on a structure to determine that it's substantially damaged. And if you look at the next slide here, this is the form, and really there's a lot of text. There's a lot of spaces here or gaps that you need to fill. But really, what you want to concentrate on is identifying those attributes for doing the initial assessment. It's number 8 here, the initial screening. How do you do that? Do you do it from a car window to window? And as Rebecca said too, if it's a different kind of storm, if it's a snowstorm, you need to consider that as well. And also, if the area is not, if you can't access the area, you may have to use a drone, or as I said before, a helicopter or some other method, maybe by boat. If you have a lot of bays and homes that have damages on these waterfront properties that cannot be accessed by the road, and it may be easier sometimes to do it by boat and go in and out of the coves or canals to see where these damages are. So make sure that's known. The question is, the initial screening of the structures in the areas is based on the following criteria. I only have one line there, or there's only one line identified there, but you you should be able to expand on that and identify different methods of doing that initial assessment. You also want to reference the time frame for the evaluation, and this is already established in a previous step, but you want to reiterate it as part of the process for the methodology in which you're taking. The other thing, or the next step, is identifying those that are between 40 and 60. And as I said before, this is where it's really important to identify certain elements that you're looking at once you get into the house and once you start doing your substantial damage determination. And that everything from the superstructure, from the foundation to the roof, siding, and interior work with the framing, I said superstructure, floorboards and flooring, cabinets. We're going to look at examples of these, but this is where you really need to identify how and what you are paying attention to in your determination, because it's, if you're on that 40 to 60 level or percent and your homeowner comes back to you with an appeal, you're going to need to know where to point them to in identifying how you made your determination, and it's right here. If you have it lined up and identified and laid out in your standard operating procedures, there's no contention. There should not be any contention, because you can follow this guidance and the standard operating procedure to document exactly where and what you were able to, how you were able to determine that house to be substantially damaged, especially, as I said, in the 40 to 60%. You may also want to identify in this area the methodology that you've taken on your initial assessment that identifies those homes that are over 50% or substantially damaged, where there's, you know, the home is possibly completely off of its, if it's a tornado, it's there's no remnants left of the home other than the foundation. So that needs to be documented as well. Next slide, please. Am I doing it? Okay. Okay, so we're going to skip this poll question and go to the next slide, which is your state partners and federal partners. And so, if you can recall, during the earlier session, is there are state and federal partners that will be able to provide you some additional support and resources if the request is made. You need to know who and how to get in touch with these people at both the state level and the federal level, and when to do it. So this next section here, if you go to the next slide, lays out exactly what you're responsible for, including as part of this the methodology to communicate with state and federal partners. The first one is, who's responsible for doing this? Is it going to be the floodplain manager? Is it going to be the city manager? Every jurisdiction is different, so it's up to that jurisdiction to determine who's going to be the point of contact for communicating back and forth with the state as well as FEMA when they are put in place in the community. Then your state partners, your DEMA is going to be one for sure. DNREC is another one. Maybe your Department of Housing, Department of Environment. All of those partners and the point of contacts, their emails, and their telephone numbers should be identified on this format. The communication method, pretty simple. Probably in most cases, it's going to be email or phone. And the time frame for response, again, it's a two-week process, but it would be recommended that you lay out every aspect of the of your methodology in this section. Whereas your initial assessment would be 2 days. State contact would be 4 to 5 days possibly, and then 1 week would be contact with FEMA, and make sure that's laid out. very clearly in the SOP. Just so there's no confusion, and like you know exactly where to go, when to do it, and how to do it. So next slide, please. The same thing should be done for federal responsibilities and federal communications. Who's responsible at the federal level? And you'll probably need to go to the state to get that person, but it's always good to have somebody at FEMA on your cell phone that you can speed dial with questions or concerns. They have special staff that deal specifically with NFIP issues. Rick Spavoda, I think he's probably still there. If not, he's probably some guy that you want to have on this list somewhere. And Dave, I'm sure you know Rick very well. And so that, in fact, I think Richard's, we provided him as one of the contacts in the guidance, if you look through your guidance.
Yeah, Rich
Yes.
Rich Sabota, I'm sorry.
Yep. And your communication method with FEMA, identify that and the time frame for response and request. So the same thing that you would do for a state level, do it for a federal level. And your next slide, please, is communicating with your structure owners. And again, this is important because there might be, as Rebecca said, I think the different types of structure owners. There might be people that only rent, or they're not there all the time, or typically when there's a rental property, you may have to go through the management company. Make sure that's documented, because otherwise, if the homeowner is at some point in time contacted that their home is substantially damaged and they're absent, or they're it's a rental property and nobody has been contacted, you can always go back to your standard operating procedures to say, this was the process that we took. It's documented here. We contact the property owner at their address or the given address. If they're not available, then we find out who the property manager is. We contact them to contact the property owner. And so there's a long list of communication between the community and the homeowner that has to be somewhere. It has to be documented somewhere, and this is a perfect place for it. Information should also be put out on to the public. Again, this goes back to communication. Some type of Facebook or multimedia, social media should be utilized to communicate with property owners to, for one, notify them of changes or any changes in the floodplain management program, disaster-related materials, and also, of course, with SISD determinations and notifying. Probably, like you really want to identify those areas on the multimedia, just so the homeowners, if they are not in the area and they've been notified that or they've heard in the news that there's a disaster, they can go on and they can see if their property is in that area or not. So next slide, please. And these are the questions that you should be asking yourself as far as what do you need to do to communicate with structure owners. So again, it goes back to the time frame. How soon after the disaster can you expect to contact those homeowners? Because again, if they come back to you and say, well, we weren't contacted, it was like it was a month after the declaration that you contacted me, and you're like, no, we sent out the notices 2 weeks after. You should have been contacted, and it's documented right here in section A of communication to structure owners. The delivery method, we talked about this before. The most known is a letter, and it's door-to-door delivered. If you can't make it to the person's door, there's always other methods. If you have a contact list or that you can gain through your assessment office, through property assessment and list of the homeowners and property addresses. That can also be utilized as a form of communication. And then the appeals process. I mentioned before, there's an appeal process put out for or established for other types of zoning regulations and legislative determinations. It's probably the best way to, without trying to like create a new appeal process, document that you have a current process that's used for zoning appeals and other types of planning and policy conflicts. So that's what you need to document there. The next one is monitoring and reintegration of the policy. So this is after, back once you go to blue sky days, the declaration's over, but you still have these kind of hanging issues with some of these properties, and how do you close out substantial damage determination and substantial improvement? How do you go back to your normal routine, and when do you do it? So these, if you go to the next slide, this gives you a really good approach and systematic time frame in which you would go back to your normal day routine, and you should be accounting for the staff that you have. And sometimes they might be going back at different time frames than the lead would be doing. Maybe the lead would probably be more involved in closing out a lot of these outstanding substantial damage properties. We've seen some of them take for the improvements. Once you have identified them as being substantially damaged, that's one thing. And going through the permitting process and making sure that they're compliant is another thing. And that's almost as important as doing the substantial damage itself, as far as a building inspector or floodplain manager is concerned, because they need to follow up on the regular permitting process and appeals process. And so it needs to be somewhere documented that so many days and staff would be responsible for doing that. And that's where this is very useful. So the next slide, we're going to go to a breakout room real quick. We're not doing 10 minutes. We're going to do 5 minutes. So with all that considered, and I know you probably, if you've taken notes or you've done some type of documentation of like what you need to do or where you need to look for this information, we wanted to share with you a chance to communicate with your other neighbors what your main takeaways were of this exercise, and you feel a product would be useful, passed on as something in the future, or what are your thoughts on this? We really want to hear back to see whether this was useful. By the way, when we put together the questionnaire 6 months ago, this was what we used. We had this standard operating procedure. It wasn't called that. It was called administrative procedure, but it was produced by Region 3. We adjusted it slightly, but this is what we used to gauge what level of substantial damage, substantial improvement effort, or policies the local jurisdictions had, and if they did, what did they use and how did they use it. So with that said, I think we can go to a breakout room and we'll report out in 5 minutes, which is 11:45.
Hey, Alyssa, I don't know if folks are getting sorted into rooms, but you might have something else to still push there.
It says to me that you are in breakout session 3, but you're just not in the session. So maybe I can move you to breakout session 1 and then try to move you again to 3.
If I'm just not in it, that's fine. Everyone else? It looks like Jeff, Robin, and this phone number are also all still here.
Yes, it looks like some people are also not in a breakout room. Did you not get a pop-up?
I must have missed it.
Maybe I can try again.
Yeah, that's working. Okay.
Cool.
All right. Well, I think everybody's back, and we can report out what our findings were from this. Again, what was your main takeaways, and did you feel this product was useful? So the group that I had, they said it was very useful. They plan to use it again or in developing their SD SI guidance or their standard operating procedures, and also include it in some of their legislative policies in their floodplain ordinances specifically. They felt that the codes and the ordinances that they have, the current codes and ordinances reference SD and SI, but there's really no detail, and there's nowhere that they can reference a document like the standard operating procedures. And this gives a really good opportunity for them to like build that out and like make these the SDSI much more effective and usable in these communities. So that's what I got. The second group, somebody else want to report out?
Yeah, this is Dave. Group one. So it looks like, the feedback that we received is that, this is definitely making some of the local communities think about things more, and even state to state, about preparedness in the event of any, catastrophic storm damages that may occur or cause substantial damage. And I think a key thing is that, we need to sit down with our local officials in each community, including our emergency response personnel, so that we're all on the same page. And that was a good point brought out by Fenwick Island, that we all need to be on that same page.
Excellent. That's good to hear. Thanks, Dave. And the other group?
This is Gina. So a couple folks in our group did try to follow along with the form as we went through it and kind of think about, what they could fill in and what they couldn't. And, it was noted that there might be a need to meet with the town floodplain manager and or town manager to kind of, discuss some of the items in the form that are a little harder to fill out, or, where the information's not immediately known. Someone also noted that, he was thinking about maybe editing a few things in the forms to kind of suit the specifics of his community, which I think is great.
Yeah, that's the more power to them when they can do they can take this and customize it to their own community. That's great. As I said, I think in the one section with the methodology that there's 2 pages of methodology, whereas all you really need to know is like what did you use in doing the initial assessment, and what did you use to do the substantial damage assessment. So yeah, I think the simpler would be better, and if you can cut out a lot of the unnecessary or the duplication or potential duplication areas, then that's going to benefit your community a lot more. So with that, if there's no more questions on that, we can switch back over to Rebecca, and she's going to talk about implementation practice, and we'll go from there. Rebecca, I think you might be on mute.
I was. Okay. The way we're doing this, we're giving the kind of big overview to SISD, and then we're trying to give you different opportunities to apply it. And so in this next section, we're just going to be talking through some of the things to inspect. And so, for instance, for the outside of a home, or a structure, really looking at where those high watermarks are and thinking about what that means for the inside, what it means for the structure itself. If you have any sense of kind of how quickly that water was moving, that can let you know if the structure is falling, or if it may have been pushed off its foundation, if there are issues with the pipes and some of those pieces. So looking for mud lines, the watermarks. You can also look at trees, shrubs, and fences nearby. Those might have good information as well.
I'm
And
sorry,
again, looking.
Rebecca. I'm sorry. This is my section. I got mixed up there. So I know you got the interior. I was doing the exterior. That's fine. That's fine. I'll take it. I know, because yeah, we rehearsed these before, and I didn't look ahead. So for footers and foundation too, you have to look at when you're doing the inspections. Damages around the house where these have been undermined or completely gone. On the one picture on the left-hand side there, it's gone completely. On the right-hand side, you see some debris that would have probably been. You can't see any damage to the house or the structure, but it's probably there because there's so much debris that's built up. It's putting force, hydraulic pressure on that foundation, and it's probably compromised. That's the next one, please, is the superstructure. So we talked about this a little bit before. When you're looking at the exterior of the house, sometimes you don't really see what's happening on the inside or the superstructure, but these columns or the studs become bowed or twisted or broken sometimes. And it's not until you get inside the house that you will see that there's damages to the superstructure. And so when you're doing that drive-by and you're making that 0 to 50%, 50 to 100%, and you see a water level to 5 or 6 feet, potentially that building has had some superstructure damage to it. Especially if it's only on if it's first floor structure. If they have 2 floors, then the damage would be spread out for those two stories and probably identified at 50%. Next slide. And the exterior finish of the structures, it's as seen in these pictures here, it's pretty easily identified where the floodwaters have gone, even if there's no water lines, and it's hard to see in these areas where they're on these homes if there is a water line. But by looking at the house on the right, it's both the siding is damaged, the walls have been damaged, the interior walls have probably been damaged, and going back to that superstructure element, those studs have probably been bowed, twisted as a result. And you can also see damage to the window on that right-hand side. And I guess that's the next slide, please. We're going to interior finish. And so, actually one more is the HVAC. And that is usually when you see damages to HVAC, it'll be evident if the electric does not work, or if you turn on if the house does have electric, and the HVAC doesn't turn on, then you can pretty well determine that it's no longer functioning. Also, if there's you can't see a watermark on here, but in most cases, if the watermark is on the wall above the HVAC system, it's also damaged to a certain degree. And in most cases, if there's any damage to it, it's usually over 50% or 50 to usually 100%, as you'll see on the next exercise that we do. All right, go ahead, Rebecca. Thank you.
Okay, so as Mark mentioned, initially you might do your preliminary damage assessment as a windshield survey. You might just kind of be looking at the outside to figure out if the home or structure is fully destroyed, if it's, not damaged at all, that kind of thing. And then the secondary part is, how are you doing the interior? And so, it might be something where your structure owners have agreed and you're able to go in. It might be something where you wait for them to apply for a permit or so, and that's when you go, you have to figure out kind of what timing makes the most sense. But to be able to see the damage, you do need to kind of get there pretty early into the process, and also be aware that, after disaster, there can be folks who are going around posing as contractors, posing as officials, and, looting or otherwise. So it's important to make sure that you have a set process for like how you're even credentialing folks and how you're making sure that the structure owners know and all that kind of stuff. So in here, just thinking about like the damage to the drywall, pretty much if your drywall has been exposed to water, you have to remove it. Mold will just grow, and also it affects the integrity of it. You can see like the high water mark here. It's also in the next image. So you can really kind of get a sense from the interior of what happened as well. And also like if there are windows that are broken or missing or doors, you know, if things are warped, that also suggests there might be some pipe failures behind the walls and stuff like that too. When you're doing these assessments, thinking about what materials are in use and also what amount is damaged. So like in this image of a kitchen, you know, the top cabinets are separate from the bottom. So if the water only got to, let's say, the bottom handles, you know, they may not need to replace the top. On the other hand, depending on, you know, if this backsplash is, you know, all tile and maybe somehow the water got behind there, then you might need to replace the whole wall. Or, you know, so thinking about kind of all the different pieces and also what it's made of, how realistic is it that it needs to be replaced, and some of those pieces. Typically the flooring will have to be replaced if it's inundated by water, and just thinking again about the environmental conditions, you know, mold can be really, really damaging, and making sure that anything that could potentially be moldy is being removed is going to be important there. Plumbing and electrical, I already mentioned that a bit, but, you know, thinking about if the whole house got shifted just a tiny bit or there was any kind of torque or twist, you know, that can cause major issues. So there are a lot of different kind of practices here for, you know, how and when to, for instance, utilities get turned back on. Some communities even strategically make it so that the structure owner will request the utility turned on, and that's when they come out for a permit inspection before they allow that, or, you know, like they use that as their opportunity for communications. There are a lot of different kind of partnerships you can set up with your utilities to just try to encourage more of that back and forth discussion. And then also, you know, thinking about if something's infiltrated, for instance, with contaminants, how are you making sure that the fresh water in the home is indeed fresh water, or, you know, like the electrical components aren't going to short circuit in the walls and cause a fire. These built-in appliances, you know, it's going to vary by the structure and how big it is and that kind of stuff, but some of these are, you know, they add up the price tag really quickly, and so even if the rest of the house is fine, this may get you to your 50%. You know, depending on, you know, how big the house is and how big some of these things are and all this state of the art and all that kind of stuff. But just to be aware, the appliances end up, they can add up to a lot. Okay, Mark.
So, yeah, thank you, Rebecca. And so our next section will concentrate on 2 exercises. The first exercise we're going to do as a group, and then the second exercise we were going to do as a breakout session, but we decided to do it as a group just to save some time. I know we got about a half an hour left, but we'd like to have some time left over to do some general questions and kind of takeaways and to see what your thoughts were and on the training, as well as the materials that were provided and how you're going to use them. So with this exercise, I think at some point in time we talked about the damage assessment tool. And we also talked about some of the other tools that FEMA provides that are not electronic. This is one. This is the SDE, Substantial Damage Assessment Residential Worksheet. So when we go through this exercise, or some of you may not be familiar with this, or you may be familiar with this form, but this sets out a number of different items that would typically be used, or this is used to do the assessment or determination on the property. It looks at the property location, general information, the structure, attributes, the type of building it is, the exterior finish, HVAC system, how many stories it is, the type of damage that was incurred by the building, and then the element of percentages. So for each part of the building, and they have the schematic on the right-hand side, they have below that each element that we just talked about, the flooring, the superstructure, the HVAC, and so on. All of those are listed out with a percentage, and then you take the final percentage and average it, and that's that's typically what they use to do the substantial damage determination. And there's a section here for notes as well. So we'll go to the next slide. And this is an example of flood impacts to a house. And so it's a one-story house. You know right now that it's non-compliant because, or it's pre-firm because the house behind it has shutters on it and it's elevated. So this is definitely a coastal community. So just take a few minutes, take a look at that house. We can go back and forth. But what I want you to do is go into the packet that was provided. If you don't have that packet, it's in the chat. It's the first thing in the chat. There's a link to that packet. And once you get in there, if you haven't already downloaded it, it's the SD determination flood and snow exercise. I believe it's the third file that's in that packet. So if you open that up, you'll see this form. So you take that, and if you have it printed out or if you have it on your screen, you can put them side by side. And I'll give you 2 minutes. So at 2:03. We'll go through and look at the results. And there's no right answer for this. So don't worry about getting things right. This is not a test. This is just to really to analyze this situation. And this is a FEMA. This came from a FEMA presentation, and you'll see, and we'll discuss this, that it's not necessarily correct. Even what you may disagree with what they have, and there's good reason for it, because I disagree with some of the things they had on here as well. But it's all good for discussion purposes and kind of a learning experience for those that have never been in a field or never looked at a worksheet before, to see what is used to determine substantial determination. We got about 1 minute left.
Maybe as folks are filling this in, someone could just share kind of some of the factors they're thinking about and how they're starting to fill it in.
Okay, we go to the next slide, and these are the results that were pre-identified. But again, we can talk about this and see what you think. Residential type was a single family residence, stud superstructure, slab on grade, shingle was a roof covering, exterior finish was siding and stucco, HVAC system was heating and air conditioning, 1 story is and with a average quality. The year of construction, date, damage was not on there, but flood was the cause of the damage. And then you go over to the percentage for substantial damage. Foundation was 0, which I don't necessarily agree with. I don't know if you're with me on that, but with all those, the rocks are in place there, but I think there might be some foundation damage there. Superstructure, 40%. That's based on I guess the level of the water line. Roof covering was 0. Exterior finish was 50% because 50% of the home is damaged with the siding. Exterior finish is 30%, or I'm sorry, 50%. And the doors and window is 0, is 100%, which I don't agree with that. That was the one thing that I kind of thought it would be a little, 20, if that, 20 to 30% for that. Cabinets and countertops are 50%, which stands to reason. If it's 50%, if water got in halfway, then 50% of the cabinets are probably damaged. Floor and finish is 100%. That was probably covered in water and bowed. Plumbing is 100%. Again, there I'm not really that sure that the plumbing was 100%. It might be 50% depending on like the amount of damage that was done inside. Electric was 75. Maybe that would match better with the plumbing and electric at the same level. And appliances was 100%. And that goes back to what Rebecca said. The house may not look that damaged, but with all of your appliances being damaged, that will put it over substantial damage. And HVAC is 100%. Even though you can't see it, it's probably on the ground because this house is also non-compliant. So any general questions on that or thoughts?
Hey, Mark, this is Rob. I had a question regarding the exterior finish. I guess
Yeah.
would you not include the roof covering with like if you look at the it doesn't look like 50% of the outside. I guess I don't know if you would include the roof in with that exterior finish number. 'Cause
Well,
it
there's
looks
a separate one for roof. Yeah, it's the fourth one down on the right.
right.
Roof covering shingles. Yeah.
So that's a separate element all alone. It's not, only 3 feet of the exterior structure was damaged or whatever you come up with. It was
Yeah.
okay. So
Roof.
I just wasn't sure. I had a lower number.
I think they keep it separate because of different hazard types, not just flood. It could be wind or hurricane or tornado. Okay. We can. Yep. Go ahead, Rebecca.
That anytime your teams are doing these determinations, having them document as much as possible is going to be really helpful. Lots of pictures, figuring out how you organize the pictures. Maybe they can code it by GPS or something. But when you think about even just this one picture, having enough information showing that it really kind of aligns with the form is going to be critical, because even as Mark's been going through and pointing out like, this isn't quite the same. Like if there was a picture that could show, here's why I think doors and windows are 100% or something, that might help make the case stronger.
Yeah, definitely. The pictures are very important to documenting substantial damage. In fact, this exercise is pretty limited because they only give you one photo, and it's hard to like really get a grasp of like what level of damage. But from a street level, and if you're doing that initial assessment, this is what you see. So it's still part of the process that you need to go through. So this is the next one on high wind impacts, and it's modular structure that had severe wind damage. Definitely electrical has been knocked out, some roof damage. Looks also because it's the type of housing that it is or structure, it's probably not as stable as the first home. So the damages are going to be more severe. So it's 12:08. I'll give you 2 minutes to pull out that worksheet, take a look at the house, fill it out, make some notes, and then we'll move on. Again, if you see anything that you want to add or just comment on, feel free to in the chat or vocally. Okay, move on here to the next. So the answers, or what was identified as the answer, manufactured home is the is the type. Foundation is piers and post. I don't know. It might be. It's really hard to say. I would have just said, you know, they had a crawl space. Piers and post typically refer to like a coastal home that's on like stilts or elevated on piers. But I don't know that that's something to be discussed. The superstructure is stud framed, roof covering, shingles, exterior finish is siding and stucco. HVAC, again, that's not seen but identified as heating and air conditioning. Story, 1 story, an average quality, pre event. And I don't know why it's flood, but it should be wind as the cause of damage. And then on the right-hand side, underneath the schematic, they have a foundation, 100% damaged, superstructure of 100%. Roof covering is 0. Exterior finish is 30 or 50. Interior finish is 50. Doors and windows is 100. I'm going to go back through these real quick. The roof covering is 0. There's definitely roof damage on that. So that should be closer to 50, I would say. Exterior finish, 50%. That seems about right. Interior finish at 50, and doors and windows not at 100. They're probably less. You know, you can still see the doors that are intact, the sliding doors, and the foundation is the other one that was a little high at 100%. But knowing that you know, it got hit by that utility pole may have like shifted the whole structure off of its foundation, so it might be closer to 100 after all. Cabinets and countertops, it was 50. Floor finish was 100. Plumbing, 100. Electrical, 75. Appliances, 100. HVAC, 100. So again, there's some numbers there at 100%, 75%. I don't really know. It's hard to say without being like seeing inside the floor finish at 100%. Definitely the plumbing is probably a little less than 100%, but this is really just to give you an idea of what to expect and some of the scenarios that you'll encounter at some point, and give you some experience with the worksheet that is the official worksheet from FEMA, and giving you some experience with the applications. So with that, we're going to move on to the next exercise, and Rebecca will lead you through that. As I said, we were originally going to do this as a breakout, but considering the time, I think it'd be better to do it as a group exercise. So go ahead, Rebecca.
Yeah, so we'll do this as a whole group, and folks can just shout out answers as questions in the interest of going pretty quickly through, but also still giving you exposure to some of these considerations. So in this scenario, there's a blizzard affecting the region with sporadic damage. So if you think about like roof collapses or, you know, down trees and those kind of things, about 100 homes have incurred damages, and the residents have been calling their insurance adjusters and contractors to get things repaired. The permit office and the Office of Emergency Services have received a few calls. So some of the things coming up, obviously, are questions around communications, questions around how you're defining your impact area, how you're going to assess it. So for this exercise, you can see the different neighborhoods, the number of structures, and it's a little bit hard to read, but essentially they're all the neighborhoods right in here and the different number of structures. And really thinking about, so what do you need to complete your preliminary damage assessments, and then also your more detailed substantial damage assessments. So just if you can unmute yourself and shout out, or use the chat and share some ideas, this is a chance to once again just kind of apply everything that we have built up to so far. What would you do in this scenario? What are some considerations to think through in how you define your team or your timing, in what messages you're sending, how you're communicating them.
Is everybody familiar with the area too? You know where that is? If you're not, just let us know, and we can we'll pull it up in a different view.
And the key point with it is just, there's some residential spots, there's, some highways, and there may be some businesses to do outreach to. So I see, excellent, Jennifer's putting in, pull a team together, divide up the structures. Yeah, and when you're thinking about how you're going to divide it up, you may end up, instead of saying like, okay, this team gets 10, this team gets 10, this team gets 10, you may say, you know what, this first team is getting 20 because they're all really close together, and this team is getting 5 because they're all really far apart. Or, so thinking about kind of the timing that it takes to complete these assessments, and then how you're going to collect that information from these people. A lot of folks opt to have iPads and, different tablets so that they can have their teams go out and just click, 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 and then download all the information when they're back. Some folks opt to have folks fill in by paper, and the benefit to that is that works even if there's power and internet issues, but also the challenge is that takes a lot longer to input and to get to your answers. So just some considerations there. Feel free to continue typing in the chat, and otherwise we're going to move on to scenario 2. Again, not a breakout room. In the interest of your time, we're going to go through this a little bit quickly. But thinking about some major flooding. So in this scenario, there's been a 1% annual chance flood, and the homes both in the SFHA and outside of it have incurred damage because water doesn't follow lines on a map. And right now, the estimates are 500 to 1,000 structures have been affected. People are starting to clean up and rehabilitate their structures because the water has receded. So what do? We know kind of where the damage took place, and what would you do? Step 1, step 2. Let's see. I like Rob pointed out, using teams of 2, one person can do the evaluation and the second can be doing outreach to the structure owner and answer any questions. And that's nice too, because then you can separate your skill set. So if you have someone who's really good at interacting with the public and maybe de-escalating some of the high conflict, high tension conversations, that person can work really well with someone who maybe has more of an engineering background and can do these evaluations quickly. Excellent. What else would folks think about in this area? Some of the things we've raised throughout this training, think about what type of structure owners you have. Are they there? Are these second homes for some folks? Are there large rental populations? Are there folks who are speaking different languages and need forms in different languages? With the people already beginning to work on their structures, to me that says you need to get your information out quickly so that they're not wasting their time and money building in a way that's not going to work. So I would probably prioritize figuring out how to communicate really quickly. Hey, you may not want to be rebuilding just yet. Hold on. This might be a good time to put up, accessible permit tents right near the impacted areas so people can have those conversations in their neighborhood instead of having to travel some distance to some other place. Okay. Well, as we'll share the recording of this and the slides and everything else. So as you think through some of these pieces, as you go through your administrative document and all that kind of stuff, feel free to work with your colleagues and think about what would we do here? How should we address this? Let's see, a couple other comments with the number of units. That's the point where, you may need to start looking outside and enacting your memorandums of understanding. You may need to escalate it to the state and ask for supports there. Figuring out stations to keep track of everyone's safety and what's being done. That's a great point too. So maybe you have different check-in spots for your teams too. So as they go out and they do a whole bunch of assessments and then they come back, they check in they get updated information, whatever needs to be done, so that you can keep adjusting accordingly. Excellent. All right, well, at this point we are almost done. Thank you so much for joining us for this presentation. You know, our goal is really to help you as you identify a standard operating procedure for your community, and that you can reference this material anytime. But, you know, we recognize this is an ongoing process. So hopefully today you've been able to meet some neighbors, if you don't already know some of the folks on this call. And also, there are a number of resources available to you, a number of people available to you. So just know you're not in this alone. And if you have questions, please do reach out. For next steps, if you are looking for certified floodplain management credits, we are pursuing those continuing education credits. So please let us know if you need a certificate showing that you attended, and we will provide that. And as mentioned, some of your best contacts are right here with the state. And so Dave and Gina, I hope you don't mind me saying, but if folks do have questions, you know, you're both incredibly knowledgeable and they should reach out to you directly. If you don't have the answer, you'll be able to point them to someone who does. For resources, we mentioned these, but you know, you have some Delaware specific resources that are great. And then also there are FEMA resources, for instance, this desk reference guide. There are a whole bunch of trainings and other materials as well. But at this point, we just wanted to spend the last few minutes to open it up, because if you have a question, most likely someone else on the line does too. And so we really want to create the space so that whatever the question is, we can all try to kind of think about how we could address that. And also, if you have a comment on something that you're doing in your community you think others could benefit from hearing about, or something that you want to learn more about, please feel free to share it. We'll unmute everyone at this point so you can talk freely, and also feel free to use the chat if that's more comfortable. Thank you again so much. It's really been, I always enjoy learning about what each community is up to, so I appreciate everyone sharing, especially in the breakout groups, and it's been a great learning experience here. Hopefully you've also learned something as well.
Yeah, this is Dave. I just wanted to make a few comments. Thank you so much, everybody, for attending today, and thank you, folks, Michael Baker, for putting this together and working with us on this project. It's been really, I think, very successful, and the rollout's it's been great. This has been a really good opportunity to learn more about this topic. I did want to just announce a few things to you folks before you jump off, or if you have any questions. On June 8th, we're going to be having a FEMA best practices for meeting day-to-day challenges course. And we also are going to be hosting a series of advanced floodplain management concepts in June, actually starting May 26th. It's going to be one per week, May 26th, June 2nd,